Welcome everyone to the Ontario Caregiver Organization's webinar series. These webinars bring together caregivers and subject matter experts to explore topics of interest to caregivers. We do this to support and engage chosen family, friends, neighbors, really anyone caring for someone else. My name is Katie Muirhead and I will be your moderator for today. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples of all the lands that we're on today. While we meet in a virtual platform with people joining us from across the province, I would like to take a moment to acknowledge the importance of the land which we each call home. The land that I'm standing on today is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendships of Indigenous peoples. As team members at OCO, we are learning about the lands from which we work, exploring how we can be meaningful allies and how we can support the recommendations from the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. We do this to reaffirm our commitment and responsibility to improving relationships between nations and to improving our understanding of local Indigenous peoples and their cultures. We invite you to take a moment to reflect on the land where you are, and if you're not familiar with that, we will be sharing an interactive map that tells you which traditional territory your city or town sits on, and you can find that at native-land.ca. Our webinar today is called Caregiving During the Holidays, Expectations versus Reality and Self-Care. The holiday season is packed with messages that no matter what, life is good. However, this ideal is often not the reality, especially for caregivers. Today's webinar will look at all the direct and hidden messages of how we should be feeling around the holidays and how it often collides with the reality of being a caregiver, which can also include grief and loss. I'd like to introduce and welcome back our speaker today, Eugene Dufour. Eugene has joined us for a previous webinar titled Grief and Bereavement that you can find on our website or our YouTube channel. Eugene is an individual, marital, and family therapist, a bereavement specialist, compassion fatigue educator, and a critical incident stress debriefing consultant. He received his bachelor's and master's degree from King's College at the University of Western Ontario. He's been working in bereavement, trauma work, hospice, palliative care, and the HIV/AIDS movement for the past 30 years. He is a past president of the Ontario Palliative Care Association and the Canadian Hospice Palliative Care Association. In 2002, Eugene received the commemorative medal for Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II Golden Jubilee by the Governor General of Canada for his work in hospice palliative care. And in June 2019, Eugene was named a Paul Harris Fellow by the Rotary Foundation of Rotary International for his involvement in establishing the Rotary Hospice of Stratford Perth. Eugene presently works as a psychosocial spiritual care clinician with the Huron-Perth Palliative Care Outreach Team. And in March of 2012, Eugene and Michelle O'Rourke published their book, Embracing the End of Life, Help for Those Who Accompany the Dying. Welcome back, Eugene. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much. And whenever I get that kind of introduction, it sounds like I can't hold down a job. And you're getting an older version of me from the last workshop. I turned 65 on November 5th. And looking at slowing down a bit in full-time work and going to be doing much more educating, which I'm really excited about. I have a 2-year-old granddaughter, and when they came over for the birthday, the line that stuck with her was, happy birthday to you. So now when she comes over and sees me, all she says is, happy you. And so that's sort of my new nickname, and it kind of really sticks around that. So I really appreciate you joining us today about this very, very difficult topic, because the culture says You should be okay. Christmas is coming. The holiday season is coming. You should be joyous. And there's a lot of shoulds that happen. And I always believe that if we can change our shoulds to coulds, it makes it more helpful. So when I come home from work and I think, oh, I should do those dishes in the sink, or I could do the dishes, or I could just sit and read that last chapter of that book. And it puts the power where it needs to be with us in dealing with that aspect. So you're very brave and courageous to look at grief during the holiday season and how important that is. I want to thank the Ontario Caregiver organization for really spiffing up this PowerPoint presentation. I sent a very blank, bare bones, and then voila, you'll see it's just so professionally done. And really, I really appreciate all the work that they do around that particular aspect. So there's my phone number and email address. If there's something that sparks an interest, please feel free to send me an email or a phone call. I'll be glad to chat with you. I love this saying. We in the healthcare and caregiving communities frequently encounter people with life-threatening illness. And you could put anything in there. Coping with the difficulties of the holiday season, difficulty with caregiving, at a point when they are no longer who they have been and are not yet reborn into who they will be. We meet them in a space between no longer and not yet. So that's very difficult for all of us to remember that no longer and not yet. And it's a constant thing. I was listening to the news last night about the new variant, and that's what struck me. I said, we're no longer at the end of the fourth wave. We're not yet conquered this COVID-19 and feeling just a little stuck around that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how COVID is going to affect our grieving during the holiday season. I love this quote by Parker Palmer. One of the hardest things we must do sometimes is to be present to another person's pain without trying to fix it, to simply stand respectfully at the edge of that person's mystery and misery. Misery and mystery. And that's the big thing that we're really walking with today is as you're caregiving, that the pain and the suffering that you're experiencing. And how does that affect mystery? And to me, mystery is not kind of a religious sense, but how is the grief that I'm coping with? How is the difficulty of being a caregiver affecting meaning and purpose in our lives? So meaning and purpose is the mystery that we're searching for. So the more that we can get people to support us, the more helpful that will be in dealing with that particular aspect. So when you look at the grief, holidays, and COVID-19, first of all, we know that COVID-19 has created a great deal of complicated grief. If any of you have experienced the death of a loved one in the last 2 years, we really got robbed of all our beautiful grief rituals and practices. If caregiving, I just think of the trauma that many of you as caregivers, if you had a loved one that went into hospital, the visitors restrictions, and they were all done for the right reasons. However, it left us with an inability to get it from here to here, out here, and then to reprocess it again. So, I never dreamed in a million years that I'd become really experienced on having people say goodbye to their loved ones through FaceTime. I remember I just talked to a granddaughter when I was working with her. Her grandmother was in an intensive care bed, and she wanted to say goodbye and had to do it through FaceTime. And she said to me, I was part of the call, and she said, "Can you ask the nurse to put the iPad right up to my grandma's lips?" And so the nurse did. I said, "Can you do that?" She said, "Fine." And I could then hear the granddaughter kiss her grandmother. And then when I saw her a couple of weeks later, she took a screenshot. I knew nothing about a screenshot. And she's got this beautiful screenshot, a picture that she's printed and blown up of her kissing her grandmother. So I found that even in this difficult, complicated time, we need to be open to different ways of, again, from getting it here to here, out here, and to reprocess it. Now, I really thought we were done with all the variants. So this new variant, and the healthcare professionals are being very, very cautious about describing it because there's so much they don't know. But you get a sense of urgency, a sense of, oh boy, we're not sure where this is going to take us. And it just left me again feeling really uneasy, feeling exhausted of being through this for 2 years and that whole aspect. And then there's that fear of the fifth wave. Again, they're just not predicting how this fifth wave is going to deal with that. Which brings me to my next point about grief. We just don't grieve in the present moment. We grieve in the past, the present, and the future. So as I mentioned, my last workshop, my dad died about 2 years ago, and I took an 8-month compassionate leave program to be with him. So if you're ever wondering about when to take the compassionate leave to be with your loved one, do it sooner than later. I thought I was going to wait so that I could be more of a physical help. Instead, I took it for 8 months, of which 4 months, my dad was really, really present. And we had just some really great times of connecting and reconnecting around that particular aspect. But my mom died when I was 19, and we never really had a chance. And so that's 45 years ago. We really didn't have a chance to do some grief work. And so I was shocked at how much grief work we did of my mom's death during my dad's palliative illness. So that was really important to be aware of. And my biggest thing that I always say to people is there is no right way or wrong way to grieve, just your way. And the more that we can support people in their grief without any judgment, that's what really is helpful. So some families that leave the bedrooms the way they are for many years, as long as they're involved in other aspects of life, if it's helpful for their grief process, the better it is in dealing with that aspect. And I love this analogy of the flashlight. When a flashlight grows dim or quits working, do we just throw it away? We change the batteries. When a person messes up or finds themselves in a dark place, we don't cast them off. We help them change their batteries. Some need double A's, attention and affection. Some need triple A's, attention, affection, and acceptance. Some need C batteries, compassion, and some need D batteries, direction. And if still they don't seem to shine, simply sit with them quietly and share your light. We can never underestimate the power of your personal presence to your loved ones. Sometimes we feel so useless and helpless. We're a society that really likes to fix things. And sometimes it's just the power of our presence, and really try not to underestimate that. That's important. So this is the thing that we're experiencing with a disaster. You have the warning of a pre-disaster, the impact, and then all the heroic stuff. You have a honeymoon phase. Then there's that period of disillusionment where you get triggered by things that happen that remind us of the disaster. And then we slowly build through the reconciliation. But this is what's happening in COVID-19 is we didn't get much warning about the disaster. So we had the wave 1. And before we could even get to the honeymoon phase, we had the wave 2 and then wave 3. And I haven't put in wave 4 or wave 5. So it's been 2 years and we haven't gotten to these very helpful processes that help us deal with the disaster. That's why all of us are so exhausted in dealing with that particular aspect. The stress that all of us are experiencing, especially you caregivers and service providers, not enough challenge. We kind of get bored and we kind of rust out. But most of us are in our comfort level, and that's where we strive the best. But every once in a while, we're called to kind of stretch. And that's often where a lot of creativity, we feel really energized. And that is really good for a couple of months. Think about how long you've been caregiving. If it's longer than a couple of months, you're already in the strain and the overwhelmed field along with that, along with dealing with all the PPE of COVID, the reductions in staff. You then get into the zone of delusionment. And that's where many of us are. And it's very difficult to be in that spot, hopefully eventually getting back to the comfort. So that's why some of the things that we're experiencing makes that really difficult. So what we know about short-term and long-term stress is we have that ability to cope with it. And then we need that recovery period. But with long-term stress, let's just look at COVID, wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4. And then the recovery period is much, much longer. So you add on all these different waves of COVID, and then home care has reduced some of their services. There's not as many services available in hospitals. You can't go with a loved one for appointments. You add all this long-term stress. That's why it's so important to reach out and ask for attention, to seek out the affection, to continually ask for acceptance of saying, there's no right way or wrong way to go through this. This is the way I'm going. I just need support. And I need you to shine your light with me. Can be very helpful in dealing with that aspect. Alan Wolfelt, if you ever get to read any of his stuff, he has numerous books out. They're often very small books because he knows that us folks that are grieving don't have a really long attention span. So they're really good stuff. But he says tell the story of the death or the grief, the anticipatory grief that you're going through, and you begin to acknowledge it. Tell it 10 times and you begin to let it enter into your heart. Tell it over and over again until you find it becoming a part of who you are. Many people say that in grief, you should be back to normal again. You've got 3 days to get over the grief and you should be normal. And it just doesn't work that way. The death of a loved one takes 2 to 3 years to get over the initial impact, and the death of a child between 3 and 5. When I tell bereaved parents that, they breathe a sigh of relief because they say it's been 4 years since Johnny died and I still feel like I'm going crazy. So the more we can normalize the grief that we're experiencing, the more we can normalize the stress that you're experiencing as caregivers is extremely important in dealing with that aspect. So just some ideas about getting through the holidays. One is structure. Some people need a lot of structure and some need to be spontaneous. So whatever works for you around that aspect is really important. So people that need a lot of structure, we're going to do this from this time to this time. That makes it really helpful. Having code words when you go to a Christmas event or a holiday event, so that if you've had enough, you can say to people that you're with, a code word that I've topped out, I need to go, and I just don't know how to do that. All those, again, there's no right way or wrong way to do this. There's just your way. And that makes it really helpful around that aspect. Rituals. So let's say a grandma dies. What I always say to the family is put some of grandma's blouses and dresses, her costume jewelry in a box and call that the grandma box. And when everybody gathers and the grandma and the grandkids come, the first thing they do is they go to the grandma box and they start wearing the dresses and the jewelry, and it gives permission for everybody to do the grief work that they need to without really being aware of it. I always encourage to have, let's say it's a grandma that has died, a grandma candle. And right before the dinner or as soon as family gather, someone lights the candle and just says, this is just to remind us that grandma is with us. A simple little statement, it breaks the ice, grandma is present, and it often gives permission for people to start sharing about that. I always give this suggestion to people that have a loved one that has died or a loved one that is grieving and they don't know what to do. I ask them to go get 2 Christmas decorations, the same ones. Give one to the people that are grieving and say, please hang this on your tree or somewhere in your house. And whenever you think of it, it'll remind you of your loved one. And I have the identical ornament that I'm going to hang on my tree so that when I see it, I'll be thinking about you. That again is a way of sharing the power of personal presence with not being in there around that. I take Christmas morning, 1 hour. I take 10 names of people that I've been working with in the last year, and I give them a call. It only takes about an hour, and it's people that I know are really struggling. That kind of reaching out is such a sacred time for me, and the feedback I get is so helpful in dealing with that aspect. Changing it up. You don't necessarily need to keep the old rituals. If they are too difficult, it's okay. I remember one family whose son had died on Christmas Day, and what they do is they go to the soup kitchen in Toronto. They're about 3 hours away from Toronto. So they go 2 days before Christmas and help out preparing. It's a very large soup kitchen that's opened 7 days a week, 365 days of the year. And they spend 2 days cooking and then come back home. And they've been doing that for 18 years. And it is such a rich experience for them. It was their way of changing it up. Having time for reflection, we often try and keep so busy so that we don't remember the pain of the loss or the difficulty of the caregiving, but we are a people that need to reflect. So cutting out a little bit of time every day just to remember, to reflect on, how is this affecting my misery and my mystery? How is this affecting meaning and purpose in my life? Again, service to others, the more that we can do. Whenever I do palliative care, there's about 140 people dying at home in Huron and Perth counties, and I get to visit them in their homes. And it's such beautiful work. I often feel guilty for getting paid. But I often say to somebody, now I'm going to another home and they are really struggling. Could you just send some positive energy that way? Or if I know that they're people of prayer, I would say, could you say a prayer? I don't tell them their names. I keep it confidential. However, 4 months later, 5 months later, I'll be visiting that person and I'll say, oh, that person you asked me to send positive energy, how are they doing? I think of them every day. So they get out of their skin for a while and feel helpful, feel that they are journeying with somebody and sharing that pain. That can be really helpful around that. Keep gift buying and preparation simple. The more that we can honor the exhaustion that we're experiencing and find other ways of celebrating the holidays can be really helpful in dealing with that aspect. I love this quote by Pamela Shadrick. She's a Buddhist priest in Halifax. The truth you believe and cling to makes me unavailable to hear anything new. I am so shocked at how, even after 40 years of doing this work, I got blinders on. And it's so important to share off those blinders so that I can be aware that there is no right way or wrong way to grieve, just their way, and how important that is in dealing with that aspect. If you get a chance to see this movie called Tangled, it's the new version of Rapunzel. And it's just a beautiful story about loss and grief. So as you know, in Rapunzel's story, the daughter is kidnapped by a wicked witch. And they do this beautiful ritual of every year on her birthday of these Chinese lanterns. But it's the story behind it of striving for dealing with the loss. And it's just a great story to watch with kids, with adults, and around that aspect. So that's one of the main reasons I would suggest it. I think you can get it on Netflix. Just a really great story. But there's another reason why I like it also. The hero of this story, McFlynn, his real name is Eugene. I can't tell you how many geeks in movies, the geek has always been Eugene. So now that the geek is the hero of it, it just made my day. I want to share a little bit of a case study with you, which talked about me having blinders on. So it was a dad, a mom, a son, and a daughter. The daughter was 13. They were from an Eastern religion, which I knew nothing about. Huron and Perth County is still pretty white, Anglo-Saxon, so we don't get much exposure. That's not an excuse. I need to learn more about that. So they live in a small rural town, originally from India. 18 months ago, the daughter was diagnosed with bone cancer. 1 month ago, she was told that she was palliative. Family wanted to take her back to India for a healing, and family wants her to die at home. On one of the days, her palliative care performance scale, which we rate at 100 is you're really good, was 20. So she was rapidly deteriorating. And then that November 24th was going to be her birthday. And what I remember about it is when I came into the house, there was this thing on their car, but it was the mom and dad, the son, the daughter, and a bunch of birds. And I never seen it with birds. So when I went in and asked about that, I found out that they have loved birds, and they even would bring the bird when the daughter was in the hospital. And then the mother said to me that her religion believes in reincarnation, and she must have been in a past life a cat, and she must have ate a bird, and that's why God is punishing her of her daughter having cancer. And I remember feeling, oh, that is such horrible religion. And I remember sharing it. The family doctor was with me, and she stopped me and said, "Do you realize what you just said?" And I didn't around that. So the daughter took us up to her room. And in this very, very traditional Eastern religion family, her wish was to see Taylor Swift. And they got that. They got her to a concert. So she had a picture of Taylor Swift on the wall, and then also some religious pictures and some candles that they could light around that aspect. And then I realized that for this very traditional family to allow the religious items to be on the same wall as Taylor Swift was incredible. And it was my judgment that was blocking that. And thank gosh they shared that, and I was able to deal with that story. She was on a pain pump, and the pain, they regulate the amount of morphine they get. So you can get like 4 extra little bolus dose, let's say before you take a shower. And but it also records the time you press it that you don't get it, so we can tell if there's a need to increase it. She pressed it about 44 times in a 6-hour period. So we knew that her pain wasn't being controlled. The family felt that pain would give them redemption. So we were able to work with that there's other ways of getting redemption, of making peace with your life while still having really good pain control. So I share that as it was a kind of a dark day in my career of realizing I was so judgmental, but it really helped me open my eyes around that particular aspect of it. So there's some things we can do for ourselves. This whole thing about self-compassion is really gaining a lot of momentum. So it's extending that compassion to ourselves in instances of perceived where we feel inadequate, failure, or even just suffering is helpful. Christine Neff is the person that's written this book. So if you wanted to Google her, she does some great workshops, and also all of her stuff is on YouTube. So it's really helpful in dealing with that. And it's based on self-kindness, common humanity, and mindfulness. So whenever I do something where I've missed a point, instead of beating myself up, I try to focus in on some self-kindness, knowing that we all fail. If someone fails in front of me, I downplay it as much as I can, but I have a difficulty doing it with myself. So the more self-compassion we can do during this journey of grief or anticipatory grief, or just the caregiving that you do, it's also based very much on mindful self-compassion. So just being mindful. I am shocked that it's been about 10 years that I've created a mindful practice and how helpful that is. So for example, when I worked at a family health team, before I went and got anybody in the waiting room, I would say to myself, okay, what am I here to learn from this person? I have a mindfulness bell that rings in the computer. I see people on the hour. So every half hour, this beautiful mindfulness bell comes out. And people will say, "Oh, is our time done?" I say, "No." I hate to admit this, but I'm getting old. And after about a half hour, my mind starts to wander about what I'm going to have for lunch or what's on my to-do list. And I'm really embarrassed about that. So that mindfulness bell calls me to attention that you are the most important person in the room, and I need to focus more on that. My work has changed drastically because of that and how helpful that is. I no longer take notes in a session. We were trained in school that you have to take notes. So what I do instead, because as soon as I'm listening to them and I go like this, I'm disconnected. So the more now I don't do the notes. And at the end of the session, I leave 10 minutes and say, I have to write a note so that the whole team knows what's going on and also to kind of direct me where to go with this. So can we do it together? And people just brighten up. So we write the note together, and then next session, we're going to focus on this, this, and this. Is that a good idea? Or did you have something else you wanted to focus on? So already they're planning for the next session by doing that. And that, again, has changed my work. That's what I mean about a mindful practice. So being mindful during your caregiving, what's the stress of this caregiving have an effect on me? How can I be more mindful to the people that I'm walking with, and how helpful that can be? So self-kindness, it entails so that being warm towards oneself when encountering pain and personal shortcomings, rather than ignoring them or hurting oneself with self-criticism. The common humanity just knows that we're all suffering together. COVID really highlighted that. We're all in the same ocean, the same lake, but different boats. I haven't missed a paycheck. For the first year, I had to self-isolate here. I'm in a beautiful location and kind of in a bush overlooking a ravine in the Bayfield River. My suffering, isolation-wise, was pretty minimal compared to so many people that financially were out of work and small businesses around that. So just knowing that our common humanity makes that important, dealing with that aspect. So get mindfulness. If you just look on any programs that create mindfulness, are really helpful, and just, again, allows us that non-judgmental, receptive mind state is a really good part of self-care that can be helpful in dealing with that aspect. I think I mentioned the last time that I had a chance to go to New York City during 9/11. About 2 days after the disaster, I was deployed to provide some debriefing. And this is the model that we use. It's actually just SSVVPP. So making sure the persons are feeling safe and secure, and just allow them to ventilate. And then my job is to validate. As they're talking, I would then say, you have a right to feel this way, and then predict and prepare. So I added the 2 R's. Before we do any of this, we need to retreat and reflect. But also, creating that safe, secure place to kind of process what you need to, and then find someone that you can ventilate and just tell them their job is just to validate around that aspect. Every group that came to 9/11 had to have a debriefing. So I was asked to debrief the Ohio State dog team. They had just come back from an earthquake in China and were deployed to New York City. After about 3 days, they realized that there was no more survivors, so they were going back home. So there was 8 of them with their 8 dogs. They brought them in. So before I started the debriefing, I said, how do you folks cope with this? You've just been to China, you've been through this horrible disaster. And they said, well, we cope the same way our dogs do. And I said, well, how's that? They said, well, every 2 hours, we take the dogs and we put them in the van. The van has no windows. And then we dig a hole in the rubble, and we get one of the firefighters or construction workers to go in that hole. And we have a tarp that looks like the color of rubble. And we put the tarp over them and then put enough light rubble that they're uncomfortable, but they still can breathe. And then we set the dogs free. Because if the dogs don't have success every 2 hours, they become despondent, they lose focus, and they become depressed. I thought, you are spending that kind of attention to yourselves, we need to do the same thing. So every 2 hours, every once in a while, checking in on ourselves. Is our caregiving causing us great strain? Is it causing us to be despondent? Is it causing us to shut down or get depressed? That whole aspect of it. And where do we find the little successes? So sometimes it's in the midst of somebody really suffering, reaching over and touching their hand, providing that kind of support, saying, how about if I stay an extra hour? You seem really uncomfortable around that particular aspect. So again, the more that we can do that, the more helpful. And then predicting and preparing, knowing that this Christmas might be really difficult. I may need to prepare some more support to shore myself up in dealing with that aspect. Life is changed. Growth is optional. Choose wisely. And that just puts the power in ourselves in dealing with that particular aspect. I love that symbol of the butterfly, and it's became the international symbol for grief and bereavement. And when a butterfly is breaking out of the chrysalis, it needs to kind of sit there for a couple of hours. If you think it's really struggling and it needs a hand and you just kind of reach over and give it a tug, it will die. It needs the struggle of breaking free to pump the air and fluid into its wings. If we help inappropriately, then they won't survive. That is such a good metaphor for me and for us, that making sure that our caregiving is done in a way that is respectful and helpful and is wanted and needed around that particular aspect. That can be so helpful in dealing with that. Rachel Naomi Remen is a palliative care physician, mostly works with kids. And she says this, helping, fixing, and serving represents 3 different ways of seeing life. When you help, you see life as weak. When you fix, you see life as broken. But when you serve, you see life as whole. Now, I had a kidney stone a couple of years ago, and I needed help. I needed help to get some clothes on. I needed help to get carried to the car. And I needed somebody to fix, meaning I needed some really good pain control in order to pass this stone. So it is appropriate, helping and fixing, but the whole aspect of serving is, we see that again as whole. And fixing and helping can be the work of the ego, which it can be good. We need to have our skills and abilities to do the thing, but it's the work of the soul that's really important. So when I talk about the soul, spirit comes from the word breath, and soul comes from the depth of you. So what I ask people how they're coping with this caregiving spiritually, what I say to them is, how is this affecting your vital breath that comes from the depth of you, and how important that can be in dealing with that particular aspect? So the book that she wrote was Kitchen Table Wisdom, and there's another one that goes with it, My Grandfather's Blessings. So just some really beautiful writings about being present for each other in dealing with that aspect. I just want to talk about a model, and then we'll open it up for questions. This is Alan Wolfett's model on companioning, and typically meant to share bread, but in bereavement, and I would even say in caregiving, it means sharing something mutually sustaining with others, something emotionally or spiritually nutritious. Companion theory holds that in every shared moment with another, there is simultaneously something being given and received. And that's the beauty about the companion model, is that not only do you give, but you receive in dealing with that. So here is the model. It's about honoring the spirit. It's not about focusing on the intellect. It's about curiosity, not about expertise. Joe, can you tell me a bit about when you got on the pain medication and you felt a bit of relief? What was that like for you? It's about learning from others, not necessarily teaching them. It's about walking alongside. I love that phrase. I say I walk with people. I walk beside them. I walk behind them. Rarely do I walk in front of them. If I'm walking in front of them, I'm missing the point around that aspect. It's about being still. It's not that frantic movement forward. At a time of crisis, people say, just don't stand there, do something. But in a type of, caregiving that's exhausting, it's just don't do something, but stand there. It's discovering the gifts about sacred silence. I think that's the thing I learned most about my palliative care journey with my dad. I do palliative care much differently. I do a lot less talking and a lot more listening. How important that is. It's listening with the heart. It's not about analyzing. So all of us were trained to listen, to respond. So I'm listening to people and my mind is going, how am I going to respond? Well, about 5 years ago, I took a fairly lengthy course on how to listen, to be present, listen to understand, so that I'm not thinking of an answer. And often I'll say, well, from what you said, I think I want to ask two different questions, but I'm not sure which direction I want to go to. Or I often will say, wow, that was very powerful. Can I just let that sit with me? So I'm constantly listening to understand instead of planning, and that can be really helpful. Bearing witness to struggles of others, it's not about directing those struggles. It's about sitting in the pit with them. That can be really helpful in dealing with that aspect. It's about being present to another person's pain. It's not about taking away the pain. It's about respecting disorder and confusion, not imposing order and logic. Sometimes as a healthcare team, we focus way too much on fixing instead of just being present. And I love the last one. It's about going into the wilderness of the soul with another human being. And it's not about thinking we are responsible for finding the way out. As soon as I've realized that I'm not responsible to take away this pain, to fix this pain or suffering, I'm just there to be with them in that wilderness of their vital breath that comes from the depth of them in dealing with that aspect. So what Alan Wolfand says about these 10 touchstones of finding hope and healing your grief, being open to the presence of the loss, because society says, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, and for gosh sakes, don't change. Well, that's impossible. The misconceptions of grief, you've got 3 days to get over it. After the first year anniversary, all those anniversaries, you should be normal. And again, it doesn't work that way. Embracing the uniqueness of your grief, and also the difficulty of the caregiving that you're doing. Most people feel like they're going crazy because you get these grief attacks or grief spasms. Again, they're all very normal in dealing with that aspect. Understanding the 6 needs of grieving, I'll show what those are. And then self-care, nurturing ourselves, being really good self-care, because grief work is hard emotionally and physically. Reaching out for help. There's been so many groups created online. I'm facilitating some of them, and they're just excellent. We're able to really touch and support people dealing with that aspect. The most, it's about reconciliation. It's about coming to terms with the loss. It's not about resolution. For so many years, we were trained to have people get closure, and the abuse that we put to many of the people that were grieving. It's not about closure. It's about walking with them as they reconcile this loss and this new life about that as they go into this time of transition. And so these are the 6 needs of grieving that I think we can focus on at Christmas time, holiday season, and also if there's an anticipatory loss, accepting the reality of the death. Some people, and it's very normal just to be in that stage of doubt, of disbelief. And that's just a body's way of slowly coming to deal with that. Allowing the person, yourself, to feel the pain of the loss, remembering the person who has died. So I always encourage family members and the general public, say the person's name. People that are grieving love to hear their loved one's name. And because then it gives them permission that, you're okay to talk about this and dealing with that aspect. It's about searching for meaning of how this death has affected the meaning and purpose of my life. And then always letting others help and how important that aspect will be. It's a pretty heavy topic. So this is my first granddaughter, Julia, and she always loves to come to Bayfield for a nap. And there was another picture of me having a nap beside her, and it really showed my double chin. So I'm glad that they took that picture out. And the other is a hug blanket that I get most of my clients to do that I'm working with. So I did this one for Julia. And so I would encourage you, if you have a loved one that you, or many that you want to do this hug blanket, go ahead and do it. It's very, very powerful. So I showed you Julia's that I made to show that you don't need to be an artist. Not sure why I put two elbows on both sides of the arms. The muscles are definitely not that big. Not sure why the arms are so long. This should come out a little bit like this. Hugs, I spelt wrong. I've written a book and a bunch of articles, and I still can't spell, but I think I nailed the glasses. So you can get these towels. They're Canada made at Giant Tiger. Often when they come on sale for $4. So I got like 30 of them in my car. A permanent magic marker is all you need. And they're just a beautiful, beautiful thing to do in dealing with that particular aspect.
Thank you so much, Eugene, for a wonderful presentation. As always, you are a wealth of information and have provided us with some really great tips and tools and strategies for our caregivers who are navigating what can sometimes be a really difficult time of year.